Shalom, 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 friends. Erev Tov, good afternoon. I am your friend Jojo from Treasure Hunt with Jojo, and today, as usual, I am going to share some insights from Parashat Beshalach. Now, Parashat Beshalach comes from Exodus 13, verse 17 to chapter 17, verse 16, and Judges 5, verses 1 to 31. To learn more about Parashat Beshalach, I do encourage you to subscribe to Malhut's YouTube channel where you can find, teachings, revelation on this week's Parashat, the weeks before, and the weeks to come. Right? So today, I just want to share, something interesting about this parashat. Now, this parashat makes mention when the children of Israel and the mixed multitude, came from Egypt or went from Egypt and they were approaching the wilderness. Remember the splitting of the Red Sea? And then Pharaoh thought to himself, what did I just do? Did I really let the children of Israel go? And so, the story, they pursue them and they end up drowned in the Red Sea. Now, one of the things that I found interesting was the repetition or the continuous behavior of the children of Israel, and that is that of murmuring. So it led me to look on the word murmur. What does murmur means? But before I dive into, what murmur means, I just want to share some scriptures that depicts or tells us that indeed the children of Israel were murmuring after seeing the miraculous or the continuous, miraculous acts of Yud He Vav He. So Exodus 14:11 to 12, makes mention where the children of Israel asked Moshe, was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be and we will serve the Egyptians? For it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. We see where these are the same set of people who cried out to God when they, were hard pressed on every side with the task that Pharaoh gave to them. And they cried out to God. But in this instance, they were quarreling with Moses. They were murmuring, asking Moses, why did you take us out of Egypt? Now, Exodus 15:24 also makes mention where the people of Israel grumbled against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So they wanted to return to Egypt because, in their view, why would God bring us in the wilderness? He wants to kill us. But why didn't he just kill us in Egypt? And they also murmured because they were thirsty. Now, Exodus 16:2 to 3 tells us again another complaint made by the Israelites. If only we had died by the hand of Yudevabe, the same hand that rescued them. If only we had died in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. So in this instance, they murmured because they were hungry, they wanted food, and they remembered the food that they received, that they ate in Egypt, even though they were under bondage or in bondage under the oppression of Pharaoh. They wished they were having those same food. Exodus 16, verse 17 also tells us where the children of Israel murmured, right? In Exodus 16, verse 8, scripture says that Yudhevave heard the grumblings, and Moses said to them, you're not murmuring or grumbling against me, you're grumbling against God, right? Exodus 16, verse 19 also makes mention that guess what? Yud-E-Vav-E, the same one who delivered them from the hands of Pharaoh and the Egyptians, heard the grumblings of the people. What's interesting is that even though God heard the grumblings of the people, He still provided. They complained, about the water. God provided water. God caused bitter water to become sweet. They complained about the food. God provided the quail and He provided manna, bread from heaven for the people, and they still grumbled. Now, I want us to think about ourselves because there are many times, we say the children of Israel, they don't have a heart of gratitude, or they are so disobedient, and all of that. But the truth is, sometimes we can find ourselves in those situations. We can find ourselves in moments where we complain or we grumble, right? We complain or we grumble. And we always have to remember that guess what? When we complain, when we grumble, it pulls us away, it stops our progress, and it means that we aren't grateful for what God has done for us. Remember, there were evidence that Yud-He-Vav-E delivered them. They experienced the first-hand deliverance from Yudevave, but yet they grumbled. And we have to be careful that when we go through situations, or even when we hope for the best or pray, desiring God to give us a breakthrough, that we remember to always give God thanks, even if it seems like He's not coming through for us. Now, the Hebrew word for murmur used in the scriptures is lud. So that's L-U-W-N. But it not only means to murmur. Here what lud means. To lodge, pass the night, abide. So it means, like if say you're on a journey and, it's getting dark and you can't continue the journey, you will stay somewhere, you abide somewhere, you will lodge somewhere. So it would mean that you have come to a stop, you have come to a halt. And when we think about murmuring, it causes us to, or it prevents us from progressing, right? Because if we realize the children of Israel, they were in the desert, in the wilderness for 40 years because of their behavior. And so we have to be careful to guard our hearts from murmuring because it will cause us, it will seize our progression, it will cause us to stop. Now, loon also means to complain. So we can't have a complaining spirit when Yud-E-Vav-E continues to provide for us. Remember, Yud-E-Vav-E speaks to the one who swears by his name, the covenant keeping God, the one who sees to it that what he tells us, what he promises, come to pass. Right? Now, loon also means demanding redress, demanding remedy to compensate, or demanding compensation, repayment. Now, think about the people grumbling, wanting repayment. Why would they want repayment? Why would they want compensation when Yudevave did in fact deliver them from the children of Egypt? Why would they want God to compensate them? Now, loon also speaks to being obstinate. So you're stubborn with words. And we see where the first instance they murmured, the second instance they complain about thirst. They are thirsty, they want water, and when they stop, when they rest at Mara, the water was bitter, and God told Moshe to put a stick in the water became sweet. They murmured, and then after that, after God quenched their thirst, they murmured again, saying that, oh, they needed food, and they continued to murmur. So, murmur Loon, the Hebrew word for murmur, means to be stubborn with words. So it means you consistently murmur, you consistently complain, even though you have experienced the promises of God, you continue to complain. That is what it means to stubbornly refuse to change. So refusing to change one's opinion or chosen course of action, despite attempts to persuade one to do so. So even with, let's look at the scenarios, different scenarios with Moses and the people. He told them on many occasions, you're not grumbling to me, you're grumbling against God. And he got frustrated at times, but yet still he continued to ask God to help them to provide for them. Right? So Moses wanted the people to have a change of mind, a change of heart, but they stubbornly spoke or they stubbornly murmured against against God, because it's really against God. So when we look at how they behaved, it would mean that they were a people that weren't grateful. So when we murmur, it means that we don't have a heart of gratitude towards God. And when we think about it, there are many instances where we don't ask God to provide for us, but yet still He provides. So it means that we always should have a heart of gratitude towards God. Now, the Hebrew word lud is made up of three Hebrew letters. Three speaks to the Hebrew letter gimel, which means to progress. And remember, I said, whenever we complain, it stops us from progressing. So if you want to progress, if you want to become great and be who God has called you to be, then you and I ought not to complain, but to give thanks instead. The Bible tells us that in all things we should give thanks. Now, the lamed is the first letter of the Hebrew word for loon. The second letter is a vav, and the third letter is a nun sofit. Lamed speaks to, or it represents the symbol of learning. So it means that God, while they were in the desert, in the wilderness, God wanted them to learn something. He wanted to change their heart and cause them to have a heart of gratitude towards Him. Now, the Lamed also speaks to the Lev. The Lev or Lev is a Hebrew word for heart. So we see where they had a heart condition because remember they cried asking God to deliver. God delivered them, but there was still more. Their hearts needed to be rectified. That is why they complained. The verb speaks to the power to connect heaven and earth. Now, if we complain, how can we connect heaven and earth? How? Because complaining is a distraction, and what it does is distracts us from really seeing what God has done in our lives. It really blocks our vision from hoping to see God do these miraculous signs and wonders again. It really prevents us from moving forward. And the nun speaks to a flow, it speaks to being flexible and not resisting change. So, why the children of Israel were strategically led to the wilderness so that they could flow according to God's frequency, so that they could, easily adapt what God is doing. But because they had a hard condition, they had a hard problem, it was really hard for them to flow with to obey God, to obey the words that God had told Moses. So that is what loon means. So when we put all these definitions together, what we can get is that, guess what? So loon prevents man from being faithful. Loon or complaining prevents man from learning how to be flexible, not resisting change. We can't complain right? Especially when God has placed someone to lead us. They are hearing from God, they are leading us on the right, the right path, but yet still we're complaining. Are we like that? Now, loan also has a value of 86, right? How do we get 86? Remember, in Hebrew, every letter has a numerical value. So the letters I mentioned before, which is Lamed, Vav, and Nun of it, they all have a numerical value, which gives us the value 86. And it speaks, so hear what loon, hear what murmur also means. To keep in, right? So it's like a barrier, and it also means to be defective. So you see, when we complain, we're not only complaining against Yudevave, we're not only complaining against God, but we are becoming defective. Remember, in Genesis, God created us Me'od Tov, which means functioning, acting in purpose, or doing, what He has created us to do. But when we complain, when we murmur, we are making ourselves defective. Now, this is a new week. Today is Yom Rishon, the first day of the week. And I am encouraging you today, do not complain. If it is that things are not going the way you hope it to go, in all things give thanks. Because when we complain, we are making ourselves become defective. And Yudevave, God didn't create us defective. He created us functional. So remember, be careful of the words you say and always have a heart of gratitude. I am your friend Jojo from Treasure Hunt with Jojo. Remember, be thankful always. Shalom.